Hello and welcome to the Omaha Podcast, where Omaha's most successful entrepreneurs help you grow your business. I'm your host, Matt Tompkins of Two Brothers Creative. So how many businesses fail? Unfortunately, the odds are not in our favor. Over half of new businesses fail within just the first 5 years. Only about 25% of businesses make it longer than 15 years. So how do you not go out of business within your first year? On today's episode of the Omaha Podcast, Anequim CFO Jeremy Aspen joins us. He's going to share with us why businesses fail, what to look out for, and how to increase your chance of success, and the crucial things that you need to know on how to not go out of business in your first year. We've been doing these episodes helping local business owners and entrepreneurs in Omaha, Nebraska here. And as a resident of Omaha and a relatively new small business owner in the last few years, at least giving it the full go, the full-throated effort, I thought, I got this down. I know everything. Like, I've watched all the videos and I've seen the TED Talks and, I'm just crushing it. And we did an episode about businesses going out of business and how that's just 25% of businesses make it longer than 10 years. And that is just a shocking statistic. And I don't think any of those businesses ever thought that they would be the one that would go out of business. So I thought, well, maybe I should just be sure, and went in and looked at things, and I'm glad I did, because there were a lot of things I just never considered. I'm more creative and kind of free going. I'm not the analytical business expert. So I learned a lot very quickly, or had to make some very, very big changes. And this can be a process that is often skipped. And I want to share that because I think I've done almost everything wrong when it comes to how to not go out of business in your first year or two of operations. Today, we're going to learn from a guy who is all the things I'm not. I don't know if...
Cool.
Yeah, that's a good way to do that. Isn't that how you introduce people? I'm all the things Matt is not.
Yeah, and pretty much everyone here in town gets it.
Yeah. Jeremy Aspen is here on the show. Jeremy is currently the CFO and founder of Anequim, and he also had Wistar Property Management Group, which you recently sold. We've had your wife on the show, and Jeremy's like, what about me? And I'm like, okay, fine.
Come on, whatever. It'll make you feel part of the family.
You're pretty cool too, but you have some really innovative and I think some very, very practical ways that people can start a business and have a game plan, have a business strategy to fund that. And then, if you have started out already, how to not go out of business.
Yeah, so it's one thing that we do as a company. So one thing, if your viewers are wondering, what's Anequim? We have only about 6 employees in the United States. All 5 of them are here in Omaha, and we have 900 employees outside of the country, out in Mexico, specifically in the Philippines. So that you haven't heard of us might not be all that surprising.
Hang on, you were in the news headlines, so let me back up.
Okay.
I'll humble brag for you for a second. So Anequim was recently named the 4th fastest growing private company in the state of Nebraska, and 612. I knew it started with an S. So 612 in the country. That is just phenomenal. And this company that you and Gwen Aspen, you started, you founded, you created from just an idea, and a phone. And how many years ago was that you got to start it to where you are today?
So that would have been probably about 15 years ago, where we started Wistar Group, which was a local company, a property management company, and then I think it was 2017, 18, we started up Anequim.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years.
Great. Yeah. It's been great. But a lot of the reason that Anequim's worked out okay is because I'd made a whole bunch of those mistakes with my first company. And that's where I think if there's some young up-and-coming entrepreneurs, let me just tell you, there's things you can do to make things not go wrong, or not for it to be so hard. You can still muscle through all the trouble, all the pain, put yourself through all that trouble, but you can also really increase the likelihood of survival, your company's survival. With, I guess, if I were going to pick one word, it'd be just discipline.
Yeah, it's okay to not be original in the sense that operating a business, the operations, the financials, your sales and marketing, there are creative elements, yes, that are original and be innovative, but the basic structure of it really works pretty much across the board. I mean, it doesn't matter what business it is. There are certain fundamental things that you need. And I did some research for today because I wanted to see how good or bad I actually did. And I'm sharing my story, flaws and all, because I think perhaps the biggest disservice that we make is by going out and pretending that everything is just fine and everything is good. And what, me? No, I've got plenty of money. I'm going on a vacation. Haven't you seen my Instagram photos? I mean, come on.
Have you seen my credit card?
Life is great. And then we internalize all of that stress and it becomes overwhelming. It affects not just the business, but your personal life, your health, your relationships. It has detrimental effects. So I share that to say I'm not perfect. I mean, there are, a lot of things I do right. I mean, trust me, my wife will tell you, but I will share when I am learning, because that's what this is all about, is you're always learning, as I'm sure you are today. So the list I found, Jeremy, know the taxes is number one. And I think by this they mean put money aside for taxes.
Okay, well, yeah. So, but I'm one of I really like to be able to focus on things that I'm good at. And I get really frustrated when I have to do anything that isn't included in that isn't something that I'm good at. Taxes and insurance are my least favorite things in the world. I hate it. But you don't really want to neglect it. If you do look into it enough to understand that, or if you know your numbers well enough, you can understand about what your tax bill is going to be at the end of the year. And especially if you're paying it quarterly. If you're just starting, maybe you're not there yet. But a certain amount of your revenue, just keep it off to the side.
Which I didn't do. I went on like wild, just luxurious, all-inclusive, the Norwegian, Norwegian yacht tours they do, or whatever they're called. I did like 5 of them in 1 year. No, I'm kidding.
I didn't do any of those. Idea. Yeah, get those experiences. Front load life with those experiences when you can't afford.
I'll be broke when I'm older. Yeah, I'll wait till I'm retired, or whatever you want to call that.
Yeah, you won't be retired. You'll be more destitute.
Was this a mistake you think you made early on, like not setting enough money aside with Wistar before with Anequim?
So when it comes to the taxes and just money, generally speaking, I've just never done debt. So there's this other thing. It depends on the kind of business that you're operating. Because if you have an inventory intensive company, you've got to push cash through your system. You've got to buy inventory. You've got to hold it. And it makes it a lot harder to hold money off to this, physically hold money off to the side. Because it's somewhat detrimental to your ability to pay other bills and things. So there's a bit of a dance and balance, but if we're talking like a services industry like ours, I've just always been really disciplined to make sure that we had enough money saved off at the side of the year. And you have to, because it sounds counterintuitive, but nobody's ever gone broke paying taxes. Sounds ridiculous, but fact of the matter is, if you're paying your taxes, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
If you're not paying your taxes, you're in trouble.
Which I definitely did, government. No, I'm kidding. And I just want to back up just a second. So at the end of this episode, if you have made all these mistakes like I have, and I may be asking this just for myself to just save my own skin, but Jeremy's gonna give us some pro tips on how to right the ship, how to get back on track. So I don't want you to feel like, oh my God, I've done all these things wrong and it's the end of my business. No, that's not the case. As long as you recognize it and deal with it and have a plan and follow through with it, I think you can always get things back on track. Jeremy, with you, the way you started out, maybe you can kind of, because like the things I did here, like, the taxes, don't spend all of your income is another one. Do the bulk of the work yourself. I mean, I did do that for most of it. Promote yourself, and you have to network and market fast. But I think you can offer a very unique perspective, a creative way to look at this in how you and Gwen, when you started off with Wistar. So you didn't have the millions of dollars and the fame and fortune,
right? Yeah. Well, so we do. If I'm talking to a business owner, and by the way, we do some consulting for hundreds of other property management companies around the country, and this is stuff that we tell them: you have got to have policies and procedures so that so that decisions are already made. You don't need to, every time something comes up, use your brain's power to determine what the next step is. Automate it. If you can't automate it, but at the very least, make sure that you've put you front loaded all of your energies into the procedures, so that you can into your operations, so that you're saving yourself time down the road. So, an example is payables. Have a system like that includes you put the bills into your software, you code it correctly, and then on a certain day of the week, you approve the bills. And then on another day of the week, the next day, you print the checks. Get used to doing that right now.
So let's simplify that, though.
Okay,
because
so
people heard the word code and they're like, what? No,
okay, right.
All right,
Okay,
so simplify it.
You get a bill for rent.
Yeah.
All right. You know when it's due. When you get the bill, let's just say they invoice you, you put it into the system. You put it into your QuickBooks or whatever software that you're using. You put it in correctly, who it's going to get paid to, what the due date is, and then you code it, which is to say you code it as rent, right? These are rent. You save it, and then start with the discipline now of every Thursday morning, sometime, going in and just approving the bill, making sure that the bill that you were sent is the amount that you agreed to, and hit print. If it's the only bill you have that week, that's fine. You're building the discipline, and then on Fridays, print the check. And then in 2 weeks, it's going to be checks. And in 4 years, it's going to be hundreds of checks. But you've already got the discipline. You've already got the system. You also already have that written down so that when you hire someone else on board, they're already following the procedures. And there's a benefit to doing this. Not just that you have this discipline, but your vendors also can predictably rely on when they're going to get paid. So what's that do? It stops them from calling you and asking. You pay your bills on time, and just be absolutely certain that you don't have vendors that are wondering when you're going to get paid. It's so easy to avoid.
It's automation in the sense that this is what I was alluding to at the start of this episode, that there are things you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You're going to have to pay bills. You're going to have to get paid from your customers or clients that are hiring you for your product, buying your product or your service. And like we started off with QuickBooks, and I think the reconciling your books and some of those things we might be able to touch on in a broad view, because it can be intimidating. It was for me.
You're right.
It's overwhelming. There's like so many options within QuickBooks, and there are other services like Bill.com is one that we use that are very simplified. And you can, like you said, you enter the vendor, their information, you enter your customer and their information, you have their bank, however you're doing your ACH payments or credit card payments. Once it's set up, you don't even have to think about it. It's just that you can set it up to just auto renew however often, once a month, once every 2 weeks, whatever it might be.
Yeah. And then to use another example of receivables, if a day goes by past the credit date that you've extended to them, they know they're going to get a call, because your procedure is to run every day or every week a list of all the clients that are overdue by whatever day you determine, 10 days, and you call them. You don't send them an email. Call them up, let them know that you're watching it, find out when they can get it, have them give you a date of when it's going to be paid, make a note in the system, and if you don't get the check by then, you call them up. That happens, say, 3 times, and if they don't have it back and you have 3 times, the next step is you just send it to collections. If the client knows that this stuff is going to happen, they're not trying to balance their cash flow with your money. They just know that this is the way it's set up. You can be professional. Well, you have to be professional about it. Be professional about it, but have a very systematic way of approaching these things, because the stability and the predictability that come from it save tons of time down the road.
And that's how you're able to project your future earnings budget to know, are we growing? Are we falling behind? Like, are there things, can we go to this conference next year or whatever it might be that you want to invest in? Like early on, would you say, because I found this to be true, not just with the financials and establishing some of those routines and automations, the procedures for those things that we have now, but also how you interact with your customers, and in the sense of not selling them the product, but just the details on the back end. So having an agreement, having a contract that you can sign, or at least that very clear in an email form at the very least of, here are the expectations for you and for me. Because if you don't, and I don't know if you had a moment where you didn't do that, it's hard to go back, because then you have to basically just start over with that relationship, and you lose, I don't know how many months or years, depending on how this may have gone south.
Yeah. Well, so so in a nutshell, here's what I think kind of has to happen. You have a product or you have a service that is what you're bringing to market. So you don't need to be the best necessarily at having, you can sell a commodity, but you have to be the best. You have to have something that kind of has you stand apart with the competition, or makes you at least a viable competitor to the people that you hope to be competing against. But there's a lot of other aspects of business, which is where almost all these small businesses fail. And it's the boring shit. It's paying the bills. It's collecting money. Just stick with the two examples we have there. What you want to do as a business owner is set it up so that shit is so easy that it's boring. You don't want to use brain power on procedures that have literally been in place for thousands of years. Like, paying bills is not, if you're creative paying bills, or you're working hard to pay bills, you're definitely doing it wrong. It's a 2,000-year-old process. Get it down, make it boring, so the time that you save today is something that is time that you can use. Well, you save time today, like the things that you're creating, these procedures that you're doing right now, what you're trying to do with those is save next Tuesday's afternoon, next Thursday's afternoon, and every time, well, that's another thing. You're saving all this time in the future so that you can focus on bringing to the market what you're good at, not these basic business things.
It sucks away from your general enjoyment for that you're supposed to be, or the things you're supposed to be enjoying as a business owner. You're doing what you love. You're setting your own schedule. Well, I've done the same thing, and I think it's common, and it's not abnormal to say that I hate doing this part of the job. It's boring. It's tedious. I just don't want to do it. So then you wait till the last minute to do it, and then you have to pull, an all-nighter. You're working late, and then the next week comes along. And you're like, well, I could work ahead. I could do my homework on Friday so I could go out and party Saturday, but I waited until Saturday, and now I can't go out. So just take the time. Trust me, I've done it wrong, and we're doing it right now. It is so much off of your shoulder.
Off your plate.
Yeah, it is so stress relieving.
Break every one of those things down into their smallest component parts that you can dedicate resources, like a time to. Break it down, put it in its normal, orderly thing. Input the bill into the system, code it, approve it, pay it, and then just have it set up so that those things are always done in their sequential, or you know what the next step is. It's really, really easy. Make that shit boring.
So the how are you doing it? The stuff that is boring, and maybe it's exciting. I mean, it's probably exciting to somebody. I don't know. Somebody believes processes and procedures are sexy somewhere on planet Earth. We're gonna have some of those links and resources to how you can find places to do that in the show notes here today. Like I mentioned, QuickBooks, Bill.com, Sweet Process or Process Street make it super easy and convenient. But aside from those, the routines and the automations of the things you're going to have to do, what are some other areas specifically to the money and not going broke? That's one way you don't go broke. You stay on top of those things. Another way you don't go broke is figuring out a way to A, start your business in the first place, and B, have income to survive on for you and your family if your business isn't generating huge profits right out, in its first year.
Well, yeah, so there's a couple of different approaches to this. The approach I've always taken is that we're self-funded. We just do everything, even when so you can bootstrap or you can borrow. Really, I mean, that's kind of, if you break it down to the simplest parts, if you're bootstrapping, like in our case, my wife worked for 18 months, where we didn't bring any sort of a paycheck on at all. And then after that, we started bringing in a paycheck, and then it kind of blew up and over the course of years turned into what it was. There's another way of doing it, which is to put together a plan that shows potential investors what you're planning on doing. And And then in those cases, you kind of have to front load you have to be able to predict, kind of something you said earlier. You have to know what it is that's coming in the future so that you can explain it to investors so they write a check, and then be able to demonstrate to them that you're on track. It's a much more complicated way of running a business, I think, but it's also one that has more likelihood of being able to work in the long run. So you give a little bit up. Ours is riskier in just that we weren't willing to take on debt or bring on new partners. So we don't have that flexibility of bringing in other people's cash to keep, cash flow, keep people paid and all that stuff. So there's
Jeremy just spilled his water all over his pants, which I just want to tell people because it was very rewarding for me. I don't know. It was gratifying to see you spill on yours. Usually it's me spilling on myself or ripping a hole in my pants. You mentioned something like when we were talking kind of before the podcast, and it was a eyes gloss over moment for me. So I explain what you were talking about there as far as getting the financials and working ahead versus, I don't know, you put it in better terms than I did.
Okay. Okay.
And simplify it for somebody that,
all right.
who passed basic college math.
Okay. Well, so compound interest is something like Einstein thought it was one of the most amazing things in the world, and it's because, like with your house payment, you're paying all this interest up front. Compound interest is basically you borrow $100 and then you're going to pay $1 a year for it, right, to borrow. And so, but let's say you don't pay it. So then the next year you're going to have to pay interest on $101, right? And so it keeps compounding, and it can work for you or it can work against you. But if you can get compound interest to work in your favor, like banks do, it's like a hurricane in a good way, in that bad example since there's a hurricane going on in a good way. The compound interest is dangerous in a lot of ways, but it's also an instrument that you can use to really make yourself richer. Like
with the funding idea, if you're looking to self-fund or get funding through your business plan from a lender or a combination of the two, I think in both cases, you want to end up in a situation where in a relatively short amount of time, you're not still paying these huge payments or interest on things. And you've kind of figured out like an interesting creative way to do that when you started Wistar.
Yeah, so there's compound interest. If it's something that you're not really familiar with, maybe this is tip number one. Better learn that one. Do a Google search. Yeah. Basically,
I throw it around at dinner parties, and
people dig it.
Yeah, people,
especially the girls.
Yeah.
The girls.
Oh man.
Oh my God. But what you want to do in business, just like how compound interest can work against you or work for you, you need to put your energies in at the front end. You need to take a little bit of time every single week to work on making your procedures tighter and easier and more boring. Because the sooner you can get into that flow, that boringness, the sooner that you can spend the extra time doing work that really sets you apart, or
working on the business, growing
work on your business, work on the next one. Like, get these things prioritized. Low-hanging fruit first, get the payables thing down pat, and then go on to the receivables thing. Just get those things knocked out, because every part of your week, especially when you're starting, most importantly when you're starting your business, you have to set time aside to make the future better, not just to push out your product. That's going to keep you in a position where you are not able to fund anything new, anything exciting, keep up on technology. Make sure you do that stuff at the front end so that in the future you can reap the rewards of that extra time and more efficient systems to make you more money.
I feel like that's really the general consensus here as far as a major takeaway from this episode is you have to put in the time and the work, and you can do it in increments. Like, set aside 30 minutes a day to work on those processes and procedures. Set aside 30 minutes a day to get your financials in order. And this may be years before you even start the business. Start putting money away.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, start putting away money now for a business you want to open later. I know in my case it was knowing that this time was going to come when I wasn't going to renew my contract. I was going to go just, no net, no safety net. and you slowly start building up, working on the side, and you're freelancer and you're doing this gig economy work so that you can roll that into what becomes your business. And so I think putting the work in on the front end, and I know it's not like the sexy fun thing to do.
It's certainly not.
But that is really the key to not going out of business in your first year. Not just not going out of business, but having a successful, profitable business in the long haul.
Yeah, it's sounding repetitive. You have got to spend your time working on the stuff that every business has. It's predictable. You're going to pay bills. You're going to collect. You just get those basic things figured out ahead on how you're going to operate.
If you look at like the top things, I mentioned how at the beginning of this episode how common it is for podcasts, for businesses. Well, podcasts
in this case, yeah, okay.
Go out of business, and it's really startling when you see that. And I think this is the top reasons they list are usually like management, financials, funding, not having the money. But those two things, the main things they mention, all really can be solved with one quick solution, and that is doing the work on the front end, planning, set aside, in fact, Gwen gave me the tip when I said, this is overwhelming. I can't do all this process and procedures, and then setting your quarterly goals and annual goals. And she said, no, just sit down, do an hour a week where you learn something new. So this hour this week, I'm going to learn how to reconcile my books and make sure everything matches up in QuickBooks. And then the next week, I work on my processes and procedures. And I think that's a more manageable way to approach it. It makes it realistic for a business owner like myself who doesn't want to do it to actually get things done.
Yeah, and so if you're going to give people, you've mentioned a couple of things that I think, okay, so if you don't know how to reconcile or the value of reconciling your books, go figure that out. I've consulted for hundreds of management companies, and almost none of them do bookkeeping correctly. Rarely do they actually do reconciliations correctly. And it's, especially when you're dealing with other people's money like they are, it's one of the best things you can do to weed out confusion in the future and to have an accurate understanding of where your books are. And get your stuff reconciled. And
so for somebody who doesn't know, reconcile your books in a basic terms.
Reconcile your books is what you're doing is you're going to take a bank statement. Let's do this. We'll start the other way. You have software that you're inputting charges, transactions into.
Like QuickBooks or
like
something.
QuickBooks. Yeah. And then what you want to do is like that universe that you're living inside of for financials, you want to make absolutely sure that it is reconciled or is exactly the same in as close to real time as possible as to what the bank is telling you happened. Same with credit cards. You've got to keep an accurate recording of what you're doing, and then you've got to make sure that the banks are on the same page as you. That's a huge, because sometimes you'll duplicate a transaction or you'll forget to put one in, something like that. Mm-hmm. And as close to real time as possible, make sure they are in there. This one's here. You click it, and your books is done. And it just gets rid of a lot of confusion.
And you reconcile books daily, right?
We do books every single day.
And that allows you to have pretty accurate projections too.
I know, exactly. So every single, and we just did like last week, $1.2 million of invoices. And our books are all done. I know exactly what our profitability is for month to date, and that's the sort of stuff that you can do. You can project into the future better. Reconciliation is one of them. Get that one figured out. Nobody does it, and you got to. And then you can make it boring. Like how we do it is every day. You can do it every Tuesday or Thursday, but do it. Just set that time aside for your administrative stuff, a certain time of the week. Get it knocked out, and it'll also help you understand, like, did the client actually pay? What if there's a deposit in there that you didn't register? Well, maybe they did pay. Maybe they used e-pay.
And you'd be surprised how that happens. Even with a good system in place, things can happen. They will happen. I mean, and that's what I did when I said, well, I haven't really, because bookkeeping, I think most business owners, it's probably not their number one skill or forte that they can just jump in and be as, as
for sure,
as proficient as you are in that area. And it was reconciling the books. Say, wait a minute, this is why things aren't looking right. You can resolve solve it. You can make a plan. And I'm glad that I am doing that, because it is easier than you think to get off track. It is easier than you think to not do these things like, setting money aside for taxes, not blowing your money on a Caribbean cruise or whatever it might be. Real quick, because I know we got just a couple minutes here, but what would you tell somebody who has done some or many of these things wrong? They're still in business. How do they right the ship?
The very first thing you do after you hear about this is go make your basic business procedures boring. And you'll spend a lot of time doing it, but it's not insurmountable. And it's got to be done, because those boring tasks are the one that you're going to end up hiring people for. And here's another thing. If they're boring tasks, like you've already got it pretty automated, you also get to pay people a little bit less money for doing work that doesn't require as much thought. Instead of hiring an accountant or a CPA, you can hire a bookkeeper, because the procedure takes care of the details about how you're going to report your income to the IRS, because you put it in the system correctly. The other one is valuing your time or your product correctly. A lot of times at the beginning, you're going to have pressure to try to compete and try to win.
You'll say yes.
You're
to
going to
everybody.
say yes to stuff you don't think is right. Stop it. Feel it. Recognize it. Don't let yourself go down that track, because they're also going to be the clients that are probably not going to pay you.
And they're going to be the most difficult.
Oh, and they're definitely going to be the most difficult. They're going to have the best excuses. They're going to say, I sent the check, you didn't reconcile your books, so then you got to run through your entire statement and figure stuff out. The other one is reputation. Don't lie once ever. I run into it all the time where people kind of make these white little lies, and people know it, and it digs into the reputation, and you can't get out of that. Don't lie once ever.
One final tip, and Jeremy, Aspen, I appreciate the insight here today, and I expect you to do our books before you leave and reconcile everything.
I think I just got done.
Yeah. Oh, you did? Okay.
Done.
It's all automated. See how easy it is? He did it while we were doing this episode. No. One thing that I think really helps, generally speaking, that I have learned in just kind of my evolution here, of what little there is, some would tell you, but what I've learned is to separate yourself from the company. And all these things here are company decisions. They're not personal decisions.
Right, yeah, that's good.
You're not making a company decision that you have to say no to the project, or you have to say, hey, client XYZ, you're cut off because of this. It's a company decision. It's the personal side that we get confused. It's that emotional side. We want to make people happy. We want to over deliver, but you have to separate yourself from that. Same thing goes with the basics of the reconciling your books, the financials, the routines, the processes and procedures. Those are company things that the company needs. You don't personally need them. That's why they're boring to us, but keep that in mind. There is a separation, and when you do that simple thing, just a thought experiment, just kind of separate yourself, it makes things so much easier to do. And that I would recommend highly for people on a philosophical note, I guess.
Well, and what you're doing in that case is, like in your case, the cameras don't turn on until we get 50% of the. That's it. And then it's their decision whether they want the cameras on.
Yeah, and being clear up front. So, I mean, a lot of very helpful tips here today. We're going to put a bunch of resources for you in the show notes from websites. You can go, like I mentioned earlier, to get your process and procedures. Keep it nice and simple, and it's easy to use. You don't have to think about it ever again. Set up your billing. DocuSign is great for digitally signing agreements and contracts. Listen, if I can do these things, anybody can do these things.
I've known Matt a long time. There's a lot of truth to that statement.
Jeremy Aspen with Anequim, also formerly with Wistar, founded two companies on the rise. I'm glad you're finally on the rise. That's good. I mean,
it's getting embarrassing.
I know the success was just kind of like
recipe. And you, I mean, don't depreciate what you've done. I mean, in the last couple of years, you've really turned this thing around. You've got a real. I mean, let's look at this place. It's really cool. You're doing a lot of the right stuff. I know you're beating yourself up for doing a lot of the wrong stuff. You're doing a lot of the right stuff, though, as evidenced by the fact that you're here.
We're sitting here today. Right. Yeah. So I appreciate that. And yeah, it's hard to do as it's hard to say.
Self-critical as hell.
Yeah. You'll only focus on the things you did wrong or
the nature of the being in charge is that you have a very filtered list of crap.
That is the what do they call that? The the imposter syndrome.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that's for a future episode. That could be a whole episode or a whole podcast in and of itself. But some helpful stuff here for you today. Jeremy Aspen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks once again for joining us here today on the Omaha Podcast. Hit that subscribe button. Follow us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening to the podcast. We have more episodes on the way, and we want to hear from you. What more do you want from the Omaha Podcast? Are there topics that we haven't covered yet that you'd like to hear right here on the show? You can reach me, twobrotherscreative@gmail.com. Hit the subscribe button, though, so you never miss an episode, and we'll see you next time. This is the Omaha Podcast, where Omaha's most successful entrepreneurs help your business grow.